Hello and welcome to NLDR, the Narrative Lectionary podcast for people on the go. My name is Dr. Amy Robertson. I'm the Executive Director of Congregation Beit Havirim, a synagogue in Atlanta, and I spent many years of my life earning my PhD in Bible alongside my good friend Dr. Bobby Williamson, the founding pastor at Mercy Church in Little Rock and Associate Professor of Religious Studies at Hendrix College. We get together each week to talk about the section of biblical text known as the Narrative Lectionary. We do it because we love it, as scholars and as people of faith, and we hope our conversations spark new questions and discoveries for you to explore. This week, we're reading Mark 5, verses 1 through 20, a compelling and heart-wrenching story of a man who suffers possession by unclean spirits. We consider possible political and theological backgrounds for the story, ask ourselves what unclean spirits haunt our modern world and who suffers most because of them, and wonder about the cost of healing. Finally, we appreciate the power of a good before and after picture, whether as a record of physical or spiritual transformation. Thanks for joining us. Hello, Bobby!
Hey, Amy, how are you this week?
I am great.
I'm glad to hear it.
We have exciting news today.
So exciting, so excited.
We are changing our name. I know what you're thinking. NLDR was so catchy. It rolls right off the tongue.
It does, right? Yeah.
You know what Bobby and I learned many weeks after starting this podcast was that many people did not understand what NLDR actually stood for.
So many people, like more people than did understand it.
I think it's a kind of weird, like if you're doing a Venn diagram, there's like people who know what the narrative lectionary is. That's the NL. And then people who know this, what is it? It's not a meme, just like an abbreviation that like teenagers use.
Yeah, it actually comes out of editing, TLDR, too long, didn't read.
I didn't know
Yeah, but it's kind of
that.
gotten picked up on social media as a way of like, TLDR means here's the 2-sentence summary so you don't have to read this article. Yeah.
Right. So we tried to like kind of smash those things together, but anyway, there were just a lot of steps in there.
But it was amazingly brilliant if you understood it.
It was
like,
super
so
brilliant.
Good. Yeah.
Super. Yeah. Alas, our wit was lost.
Yes.
We're going with something simpler. Bible worm.
Bible worm.
And now we can have a mascot.
Chewing through the scriptures to fertilize your spiritual garden.
Yes, we also have come up with very many, a veritable treasure trove of jokes and taglines that you can look forward to.
Like a bookworm, but for the Bible.
Bobby, can you talk a little bit about what people should expect? What is this going to look like for listeners?
Yes, so the short answer is I'm not sure. But here's what I think. We're going to shift from NLDR to Bible Worm for our February 3rd episode, which is 2 more episodes after this one. I think for people who follow us on Podbean, it'll just show up like normal. For people who type in nldr.podbean.com, you should be able still just to type that in and it'll take you to the new site. The only concern I really think I have is for people who follow us on other services like iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Caster, those kinds of things, that you might lose our RSS feed. I think I know how to do that, but I'm a Bible scholar, not a podcast producer.
Maven.
That's so much better. So if you lose us and you show up on February 3rd and there is no podcast, before you lose heart and descend into the depths of despair, you can just either find us on our Facebook site, which is Bible Worm Podcast, so facebook.com/Bible Worm Podcast, or just go to our new website, which will be BibleWormPodcast.com, and you can relocate us there. So if you lose us, come back and find us, because we love you.
Because we'll miss you.
And we'll miss you. Bible Worm.
Okay, can I suggest a theme song for us?
Oh, yeah.
It's stolen. Bible worm, does whatever a Bible worm does. And then we could write verses about what he does.
Is that
It's Spider-Man.
Oh, I thought it was Particle Man.
Oh, no, we could also do that.
Things a particle can.
There's so many choices.
Bible worm, reading the Bible.
Bible worm.
He's Bible worm.
Okay, so
February 3rd, Bible Worm, coming soon to a Bible podcast near you.
to a Bible near you. Excellent. I think that's all the housekeeping we have to do. And we're ready to do text. Is that right?
Let's do it.
Excellent. Okay, so chapter 5 picks up. They're on the other shore now. They've landed at the other shore.
Yes. So it's worth saying that by crossing into the other shore, they have now left Jewish territory and they have landed in the land of the Decapolis.
Yeah, Gentile territory.
They're in Gentile territory, yes.
You have to do the voice, Gentile
territory. Yeah, so this is the first time in the Gospel of Mark that Jesus has been outside of the Holy Land, and he's ventured into the land of the Gentiles.
Okay, so I'm going to pick up chapter 5, verse 1 in the NRSV. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when he had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him any more, even with a chain. For he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces. And no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. That is just about the most heartbreaking description that I can imagine.
I mean, one of the things that I have appreciated about reading the Bible with you, Amy, is that you are always empathizing with the people who are not the main point of the story.
I'm easily distracted.
No, but I think that's a really good thing, and especially in this case, that it's easy to focus in this story on the demons, right, and the evil spirits. But there is a man here who has been possessed by them, and this is his life, as he's out on the edge of town, and the townspeople keep chaining him, and they're trying to subdue him all the time.
He's bruising himself. I mean, his suffering is enormous. Mm-hmm. It starts by telling us that this man had an unclean spirit.
Yes.
Is this the same thing as saying possessed by demons?
So, when we're thinking about Mark's framework for how he views the world is kind of under the sway of Satan, right? So evil, unclean, unholy. Mm-hmm. And so you've got this realm of spirits that's being contrasted with the Holy Spirit. And so there is a conflict of spiritual realms. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the rulers of the age in which Jesus finds himself are the unclean, the evil, the unholy spirits. And Jesus is representing the breaking back in of the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that there is nuance about, are they unclean or are they evil? And the word here is spirit, which is a different word than demon. Mm-hmm. So I think evil spirit or unclean spirit is probably the right way to read it.
In the Jewish tradition, being unclean is not the same as being evil. Being unclean is a ritual state. Like we talked about that person who had quote unquote leprosy, right?
Yeah.
It's not a judgment really of that person, although their uncleanness does cause a real rift in their relationship to community and causes social isolation, which here too, we see the isolation of this man who's living in a cemetery.
Yeah.
Being chained up. And it is also notable to me that, being in the presence of death, being around dead bodies or in cemeteries also carries this connotation of uncleanness in the Jewish tradition. Not evil. Like, it's not like you can never go there and you should never go. Of course, It's part of the life cycle. You go and you bury your dead and you visit your dead. But it changes your sort of ritual state a little bit. So I don't know if there's any of that layered into this or not.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely worth noticing. And so when you're talking about unclean, like we're in a Gentile territory.
Right.
Graveyard. Right. We have an unclean spirit, and we're about to see that they're herding pigs. So there is absolutely something happening here about ritual uncleanness, ritual impurity. Mm-hmm. The spirits that are possessing this man are also harming him. And so I think in that sense, they are evil, or they are oriented against his human thriving or something like that. Mm-hmm. But I think the uncleanness of it, I think, is the right focus, especially in this context. The unclean spirit versus the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, in a place of death as opposed to a place of life.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, picking up then in verse 6. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him. And he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country.
Yeah.
The pronouns in this part are tricky. Like, I see all these sort of footnotes of places where the NRSV has said, like, that's Jesus, and that's why you can't have a story with only men.
Yeah, the pronouns are complicated, and then there's a little bit of switching back and forth between singular and plural, and there's a little bit of ambiguity about exactly who the subject of the verbs is, especially when we're talking about this man who has the spirit, and then we have a spirit in the singular who speaks for a bit, and then they start speaking in the plural. I don't know what the authorial intent was, but it creates this really interesting kind of, it's hard to separate the human under the possession from the spirits possessing him.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And it doesn't just go one way and then switch, like singular, and then switches to plural. It's like waffling back and forth, which is this really interesting way of thinking about like what it's like to be a person who has in one way or another been possessed by some kind of external power.
Right. No, I love that. And I love the blurring of those lines, especially sort of the way you were talking about how Mark sees the spirit world as being really active. And it really, to me, it really just sort of brings it to the forefront. Like, you can't even tell who's talking, and you can't even tell who the different entities are. Like, how do you parse out one from the other here?
Right.
Because just one big hot mess.
That's exactly right. But it's interesting that, again, the spirits recognize him right away, where nobody else really gets who he is. And this spirit says something quite similar. "What have you to do with me, Jesus?" It's quite similar to what the spirit said in Mark chapter 1. And I think here it probably means something like, what do we have to do with each other? Or like, why are you even here? This is my place to be. And so I think there is some kind of sense of Jesus has intruded on territory that the spirit thinks belongs to the unclean spirits. It's interesting when we're talking about these two stories and how they fit together, Mark 1 and Mark 5, that Mark 1 is the first thing Jesus does in Jewish territory, and Mark 5 is the first thing he does in Gentile territory.
That is very interesting.
So in both cases, his first action is to cast out an unclean spirit, which is kind of the first Jesus has reclaimed the Holy Land, and now Jesus is reclaiming the Gentile lands or something like that.
What do you make of the fact that, as far as I could tell back in Mark 1, Jesus just said, "Get out, unclean spirit," and it happened, and it didn't have a choice but to respond. But that's not what happens in this story.
No, the way this story is told is kind of strange, isn't it? Because we get the actual casting out happens as a like, oh yeah, by the way, in verse 8, Jesus had already said, "Unclean spirit, come out of the man." So it's like we don't, in the narrative time, we don't even see it happen.
But then he asks for the name, and by the way, the name of this unclean spirit will give me nightmares for the rest of my life.
Legion?
Just like, my name is Legion, for we are many. Oh God,
Yeah, that's intense.
That is the creepiest answer ever.
Yeah.
It's super creepy. I just like picture spiders. Like, you think there's like one spider somewhere, and then all these spiders come out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
spiders.
legion is, related. It's a borrowed Latin word, and it's related to
like an army, isn't it?
Yeah, the Roman imperial forces were organized in legions, and a full legion in the Roman army was 6,000 soldiers. They were not always fully equipped, and so we don't really know. But in a minute we're going to see 2,000 pigs, and so we might imagine that there's at least a couple thousand spirits that have possessed this guy. Because up until that moment, it's like it even says in verse 9, he responded, "My name is Legion." Like right up until then, you're thinking, oh, it's one spirit. And then he says, "Because we are many." Yeah.
Yeah. So creepy. Yeah. But I mean, then the fact that these evil spirits, the army of them, goes on to beg earnestly. Yeah. This story is so distressing to me.
Yeah.
Not to be sent out of the country. Why do spirits care about geographical boundaries? Like,
before I say what I think, do you have thoughts, or are you?
I mean, I don't know if this is like the right. I mean, it's going back to sort of like pre-Hebrew Bible traditions of certain places on the earth having a particular connection to
holiness or sacredness, of like the idea of like the location of the Temple Mount is not just wherever, that there's, you know, sort of the foundation of the Temple Mount is connected to the idea of where the sort of waters of chaos are being controlled. I mean, these are very old ancient Near Eastern tropes that sort of work their way a little bit ambiguously through the Hebrew Bible stories. And I don't know if there's some of that sensibility here, that there's like an energetic field around certain places, geographical places on Earth, or they just know where like the best falafel is.
No, I really like that. And I think that there's something to that. So Jesus has in Mark chapter 1 waged war on the unclean spirits in the Holy Land. And now Jesus is carrying that beyond the bounds of that place where the temple is and all of those things to a place outside. So Jesus has like expanded the theater of action. And so, you know, if you kick us out of this region, then, you know, what's going to happen next? I think that's a good reading of it. I have another reading of it that may or may not be good, but I don't think it makes any sense until after we've talked about the pigs. So let's go ahead and read that, and then we'll come back.
Okay. Verse 11. Now, there on the hillside, a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine. Let us enter them." So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea.
So there's a few things that we know about pigs. One of them is that they are considered unclean in Jewish tradition. So I was just curious, kind of from a Jewish lens reading this text, is that kind of like, were you making that connection about pigs and uncleanness, or how does that, just the literal pigness of those pigs?
The literal pigness of those pigs. This is going to be shocking to you, Bobby, but I started to have a lot of empathy for the pigs.
Of course you did, yeah. I mean, there's
those poor pigs.
For real.
I mean, what? They're just herding around, doing what pigs do, not chewing their cud, which is why they're not kosher.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, they're like, they're possessed immediately and then drowned. This doesn't answer your question. You know, my interpretation of why Israel is not supposed to be eating pig is mostly to set it apart from what all the other places do. So seeing that the neighboring place has pigs in it, I don't know, it didn't really stand out to me.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So I go back and forth when I read this about whether Mark's original audience, or whether, whoever was telling the story pre-Mark would have thought like, oh, haha, those pig farmers lost their pigs. Or whether it would be more like you're saying, where like, we don't eat pigs, but we don't really care that much if you eat.
I mean, there's no, as far as I know, both sort of biblically and in modern Judaism, there's no like other people shouldn't eat pigs. There's nothing inherently wrong with a pig. It's just not kosher for Jews to eat.
Yeah. Another thing that you could say is that pigs not only were eaten by Gentiles, but in the Roman period anyway, pigs were also, you could sacrifice them to your gods. You could eat them with holy meals. Like they functioned in the religious cult. And so one way of thinking about it, possibly...
They shut down that cult somewhat.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you've taken these animals that are related to the cult and you've cast unclean spirits into them, which is to say those animals and that cult are unclean, and then now they're going to go run into the sea and drown. So that could be seen, like you could almost see like a religious, like a spiritual warfare that is taking place here, where these animals are representing the pagan religion. The other way that those pigs are sometimes read, and this is related to the word legion, which is a term that's a little bit weird in this context, but it's not weird if you're thinking about Roman armies. The same is also true of the word that's used for herd in verse 11 in Greek. Agele isn't really a word that people, like, you wouldn't talk about an agele of pigs. It's a kind of a strange word, but it is very much at home in talking about soldiers. And the running of the pigs into the ocean might raise in one's mind the image of Pharaoh's army drowning in the sea.
That's interesting.
And also the Roman 10th Legion, which was stationed in the region of Palestine. The insignia on their shields and banners was a wild boar. So the way some scholars have read this, Ched Myers and Richard Horsley and others have read this, is that Mark's really trying to create a symbolic scene of the Romans being driven out of the region, not just out of Judea, but out of the whole region of Judea and Palestine, Syria. That wording that you were noticing, don't kick us out of this region, to me, that really only makes sense to me if you're talking about these pigs as somehow representing the Romans. What do you think about that? Is that too political off the wall, or does that kind of sound right, or what are you thinking?
I mean, I do think that pulls together some parts of this text. It's, for example, the regionality of it.
Yeah.
And why they want to be cast into pigs. I mean, I guess, again, I don't know enough about sort of these unclean spirits and do they always have to be in a living thing? Can they not just swoop around? I don't know. I don't know what the sort of theology behind this is, but it pulls together a lot of disparate parts in a coherent way. And so that is very appealing, but it is not where I went. You went political. Well, you didn't go political. And I go theological, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Ched Myers went political and
you quoted him. Yeah. Yes. Fair enough. I went to Azazel.
Oh. Yeah. Say more about that.
So in Leviticus chapter 16, it's a super bizarre ritual that we read about every year on Yom Kippur in the synagogue, and every year it's just as bizarre as the last year. So Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement, and there's a description of a ritual where there are 2 goats, and the high priest casts lots, rolls dice, over them, and one of them becomes a sacrifice to God, right, a burnt offering, and the other one is sent into the wilderness either for Azazel or as Azazel or to Azazel. It depends, that's a problem with translation. We don't know exactly. But the idea is that, you sort of ritually put the sins of the people on this goat and send it into the wilderness. There's a description of a ritual from around this time period, the Second Temple period, where the goat then is pushed off a cliff so that we can be sure that it can't wander back into society with all the sins on it, right?
Yeah. So here the uncleanness has been put into the pigs.
Yes.
The pigs are then destroyed in the sea.
Right.
And so it's a way of saying this place has been purified.
Yes, maybe. I
really love that Azazel image. I think that's a good background for this text.
I mean, it doesn't make me like this story any more than I did. I still think it's a sad story.
Yeah.
But it does provide some more context for it.
Yeah.
I guess.
There's also an economic aspect of this text. I mean, somebody owned those 2,000 pigs. 2,000 pigs is a lot of pigs. That's worth a lot of money. And now, their herd has been wiped out. They've been, their economic status has been decimated.
Right.
I mean, this text doesn't really draw that out. I don't know that Mark's text is actually that interested in the economic side of it. But it's interesting to me as a reader. Jesus, I think, could have cast out those spirits without sending them into the pigs. And yet Jesus chose to send them into the pigs, thusly ruining someone's livelihood. Jesus is not concerned about that, at the very least.
Verse 14. The swineherds ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Yeah, I bet they did.
Yeah.
Then people came to see what it was that had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the demoniac sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion, and they were afraid. Those who had seen what had happened to the demoniac and to the swine reported it. Then they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by demons begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus refused and said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed. What do you want to pull out from this little section?
So it's the swineherds who run into the city and then they bring everybody else out.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, here's this guy who's like a member of their community who has been possessed by demons and thrashing himself and breaking chains and been in a horrible situation. And they say, hey, look, this guy, he's no longer possessed by a demon. Like, he's sitting there, he's like, he's wearing nice clothes and completely
he's
back
like
to
drinking
normal.
tea. He's like sitting politely.
Yeah, and the people's response is they are afraid and they tell Jesus to leave. They're not like, hey, friend, like, so
Isn't
good
that
to see you.
fascinating?
Yeah, and then get out of here.
Yeah.
I've been struggling with, like, how do you make sense of that? And the only thing I've really come up with is that they had gotten comfortable having a spirit-possessed man on the outskirts of their town, and there was kind of a social order in which that seemed okay to them. And when Jesus upended that social order, it freaked them out about how do we go on? Like, things are no longer the way they were.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I'm not super satisfied with my interpretation. What do you think about them?
I mean, I think in some ways you're exactly right. Like, they thought this is how it is. Like, this is either because it's a particular social structure and a power structure, which certainly it was, or if it was just like, this is an unchangeable thing. Like, this is just reality. This is who this person is. This is a person who screams and beats themselves and breaks chains in the cemetery. And then to have that change so abruptly, like to sort of recognize the power that must have been present to enable that to happen, is overwhelming. But it's interesting to me that their response was like, I don't want to be around this power.
Yeah.
Like, if you could do that, you could do anything. And I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
But that does sort of go back to the idea of like, we might not like some things about the status quo, but we're not ready to like throw it all up in the air and see what happens.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Going back to kind of playing with this idea of the economics of this passage, one could read this as the healing of that man was not worth the economic toll that took place in the miracle. They're weighing out the life of this guy versus the economic value of these pigs that have been destroyed in the process, and they don't like the trade.
That's heavy, Bobby.
It is heavy, and I'm not sure it's in the text.
but
like leaning into sort of like, what does this text say to us?
Right, exactly. Starting to, dip a toe into that question. Yeah.
I think that's a productive way of thinking. Like, what is the cost of people who are on the outskirts being healed, and are we willing to pay it? And these folks, at least in one reading of this text, they are not. They would rather have their pigs and a crazy guy and have him like back to his full and whole self when it's going to cost them money.
Yeah.
Now then the guy, like, he wants to go with Jesus.
And Jesus says, no.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
But so let's think about both of those things. Like, first of all, the fact that he wants to go with Jesus.
Yeah, is this the first person? I mean, it's like most of the disciples, Jesus had said, just sort of said, follow me, and they did. And this guy actually reaches out and says, I want to follow you.
I mean, he's so drawn and so grateful to Jesus for having done that he wants to say thank you, or like joy, like whatever this is, like, I want to help it continue to grow.
I think that's probably right, and that's mostly how I read it, but I do have a little bit of a, like, is he worried about staying in this place where he's been? Like, what is it going to be like for him now? What would that reintegration into society look like? Maybe he just doesn't want to be there. But I think he does want to follow Jesus.
No, I love that, where you were headed. And I mean, I don't know that those two readings necessarily have to be in conflict with each other.
Yeah.
Kind of striking in this text that there's nobody who's like, oh, praise God that this
I know, Jimmy's better. Right.
Yeah. There's no family who shows up. There's no...
Yeah.
And so I think that's I think that's really worth thinking about, that this guy has been possessed by unclean spirits living on the outskirts of society for so long that that's all he can ever be to this community. He doesn't have any people left, and the people can't make space for him in his new way of life. I mean, I don't know, like we're reading a little bit past the text here, but this text certainly kind of opens up that possibility.
It opens the door.
Then Jesus says, no thanks, right? So what he says in the CEB, go home to your people and tell them what the Lord has done for you and how he has shown you mercy. So Jesus sends him back to his people. So, I mean, I don't know, like it's totally speculating, but why do you think Jesus sends him back?
Okay, here's my speculation. Almost maybe because this is the first person who has seemed so sort of compelled that he has directly asked to go with Jesus. Maybe Jesus felt like you already get it and you could do more for the cause if you stay here and, sort of stay here and sort of travel among quote unquote your people. I don't know what exactly that means, but like stay sort of in your region and talk to your people and sort of spread the word here because I have a team of people with me. Maybe it was sort of like a backhanded compliment.
Yeah.
You can't come with me because you're so great.
Yeah. One way of reading this text is that the reason that this guy's story is going to make a difference is because people knew who he was. Because you imagine if your town has a demon-possessed man who claws himself in the graveyards and breaks chains. Like, people know about him, not just there, but in the region.
Right.
And so when he goes around and says, you know who I was, look what Jesus did for me, that is a powerful witness. Whereas if he goes across the lake and they have no idea who he is, and he's like, hey, Jesus is great. They're like, cool, but like, so like, why
we heard that from the other guy. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you read it that way, then the message here is something about those things that we carry with us from the past that can demonstrate the transformative power of God's inbreaking kingdom. Those are the things that matter. So stay with people who can recognize the change that has happened. Like, you use those things that have been part of the past in order to proclaim the possible future.
Can I tell you a very mundane story?
Please.
Okay, so I work out at Orange Theory, and they're starting this thing called the Transformation Challenge for the next 6 weeks, and I'm not going to win the Transformation Challenge, but it's an extra sort of layer of accountability, whatever. Yeah. And so at the beginning, they weigh you in and they do a body fat analysis. And this is the worst part. I saw someone doing it the other day. They take a picture of you from every angle, like front, side, and back. They take a picture of your rear to see how much you've transformed. And so what you're saying is it's not a transformation of your rear necessarily, but having that record, like that public record of where you're starting from, is really important.
That's a great analogy.
Isn't that a great analogy?
Yeah, like the after picture is mostly meaningless unless there is a
before picture, and everyone in this community has the before picture. That was a much more succinct way of saying that. I'm obviously really concerned about having someone take a picture of my rear tomorrow.
Your story is such a better story than
oh my God,
my little pithy reduction of it.
All right, so that brings us to the end of this week's narrative lectionary. We have read chapter 5, verses 1 through 20. And now here we are in our modern lives and modern communities. Where do you find some meaning and some message, Bobby?
So I'm really compelled by this connection of the evil spirits, the unclean spirits who are occupying the land, to the possibility of the Roman Empire. Which we talked about. And so if you think about that in terms of like the empire that occupies us is generative of these unclean spirits, then when you try to think about like, well, what are unclean spirits in our own time? Like things that come with the empire that take control of our minds and bodies and put us in pain. And I'm like, I don't know what you might come up with, but in my mind, spirits like racism and sexism and misogyny and avarice and all of these kinds of things that our kind of consumerist, militaristic culture kind of brings to us, that causes a lot of pain for some people, but not for everyone. And so when I think about this guy possessed by the spirits, I think of him as a representative of the people for whom those negative spirits of the empire have a harsh effect. They cause pain, they cause isolation, they cause a fracture with the community. And then when Jesus comes along and says, look, I can heal this person, but the cost of it is going to be, we're going to drive out the empire and send it into the sea, and it's going to take with it its economic prosperity, but you can have this person back whole and healthy. The community doesn't want it. They say, go, like, get out of here. We don't want you with us anymore. That's the way that I've been reading this. And I read myself in that as one of the pig herders who's, I worry that that I and people like me are comfortable with there being those on the edges of society who are wounded by the presence of the spirits. But I'm willing to pay that price because, like, look how big my pig herd is. And
look how many pigs I have.
Seriously, I got 2,000 freaking
So many
pigs, man.
pigs.
Yeah. And one way of reading this text is that there is a cost to the healing of the community and to the restoration of people who suffer because of the values of the culture that has possessed us. And part of the problem that we have is many of us are not willing to pay the cost. We actually don't want Jesus around. Because when Jesus comes around, he transforms things in ways that are costly for those of us for whom the current situation kind of works. And the call then of this text is to say, no, like the concern, Jesus' concern, his immediate and only concern, like before anything else happens in this text, Jesus has cast the spirits out of this isolated, wounded, struggling person. And so I think that's kind of it, is when we let Jesus loose among us, Jesus does things like that. And there's a question here of whether we're willing to let Jesus loose. Do we want to pay that price?
That is like a much more eloquent and sophisticated and fleshed out version of sort of where my mind goes. And my mind really, I'm sitting with the question. When I think of that man who is suffering so much with something he doesn't seem to be able to control and is behaving in legitimately scary ways, right?
Yeah.
Like I can understand why people are afraid of him.
Yeah.
But he can't control that.
Yeah.
I've been sitting all week with the question, who is this today?
Yeah.
Who is this? And it's more than one, person or population, but who is it who is suffering and isolated? And the best we can think of to do is keep them away and try to tie them up and try to just push them away.
Yeah.
And I think your observation that when he's healed, nobody missed him.
Yeah.
Like there's nobody who is happy for his healing. It just sort of drives it home even more. So, I could think of a lot of different populations this could be, but I also feel very aware that I don't want to directly compare anyone to someone possessed by demons.
Yeah.
Because that, that could be a really, that could go way off the cliff. But I think the sort of imaginative exercise of leaders of religious communities of thinking, who is this? Who do we do this to now? Who are the people now in our societies or even in our communities that we do everything we can to contain them and contain them as far away from us as possible?
Yeah.
And what is the cost of that? And what would be the cost of healing them?
No, that's really well said. The way, that struggle that you're having, and I think is the right one about, how do we talk about demons and demon possession? And you're right to be really cautious about that. And so ought we all to be. Mm-hmm. The part of where my head has gone is to think that, the unclean spirits are present in the land, and they have, their effects have become concentrated in the body of this one person. Mm-hmm. So the way that I kind of read that is sort of as an intersectionality of oppressions that all collect on certain demographics of people. And it's not that they are possessed by demons, but it's that the effects of these spiritual presences in the world concentrate on them. I don't know if that solves any of that issue.
No, I like that additional layer of it a lot, and I think I'm going to sit with that some more this week.
Good text.
Good text. Next week, we are still in Mark chapter 5.
Yeah.
Just picking up at the next verse.
Yeah, this next week's story is there's two stories that are folded together. One about a woman who needs healing and one about a little girl who's close to death. And it is a fascinating text.
Great. Well, it is always a great pleasure to talk with you.
It's good to talk with you too.
And I look forward to talking again next week and hope y'all have a great week. Bible Worm, don't forget.
Next
Bible
week,
Worm.
we're still in LDR. The week after that, Bible Worm.
Yeah.
All right,
Bye.
friends. Bye.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of NLDR. I hope you'll be back again next week as we continue through Mark chapter 5. Have a great one.